Good afternoon. I'm Peter Stein, Senior Programmer for Frameline. Before we start our conversation with the filmmakers of this extraordinary documentary, I want to acknowledge how personal and emotional and even difficult a journey this film is for each of us, whether we knew Chaz as a friend and a colleague, as I did, or whether you're meeting her here in this film for the very first time. Witnessing the end of life, as we do in this film, is not an everyday activity. It is both a privilege to witness and also, in some ways, a great burden. So, out of gratitude to Chaz for sharing her experience with us and honoring all of the people in our lives who we're thinking of right now, perhaps who have passed or who are battling illness themselves, I invite you, before we talk, to just pause a moment in their names and observe a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And it is a privilege for us at Frameline to welcome the amazing group of Chaz's filmmaking friends and family who brought this documentary to completion. And you're going to meet a bunch of them because this, in fact, was a collaborative effort. I think we're going to bring them onto the screen now. Please welcome, first of all, here they come, popping on into our mosaic. Welcome to all of you. First, please welcome Kate Stilley-Steiner, co-director of the film with Chaz and a longtime collaborator of hers. Also with Kate there is Mike Shen, the film's editor. Please also welcome Nancy Otto, whom of course we all had a chance to meet in the film, who's Chaz's widow and a producer of the film Prognosis, Notes on Living. With Nancy is Lydia Zako, a longtime friend of Chaz and Nancy's, a producer on the film, longtime Bay Area documentarian who was behind the camera on quite a bit of the film that you just watched. Also with us, Joan Lefkowitz, who also is a producer and a friend of the family, who also shot a lot of the film and who edited Chaz's Oscar-winning documentary, Deadly Deception. And last but certainly not least, Carrie Lozano, who directs the Sundance Institute's documentary film program and is this film's executive producer. Well, welcome to you all. It's a big mouthful, but it's a big team that brought this film to completion. Congratulations. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
It's truly a collaboration and a labor of love for all of you. I want to give first word, pride of place, to Nancy. Nancy, it's been nearly 3 years, actually more than 3 years since Chaz's death, and almost exactly 3 years since you and I were together on the stage of the Castro, where you accepted the Frameline Award posthumously in Chaz's name. First, please, how are you doing? How are you doing now, particularly after watching and going through this film?
Thank you, Peter. It's a real joy and pleasure to be here, and so happy that Frameline is where we get to do our world premiere. I am well. I'm well. I feel that I'm obviously have Chaz in my heart constantly, and I feel that she's with us right now. Actually, she wouldn't miss this at all. But I also am living fully. I continue to live fully. And so yeah, the project has helped.
I guess I'm wondering, the grieving process is always lengthy. Maybe it's lifelong when you've lost your person, as you so beautifully put it in the film. How do you think it might have been different? It might be different because you've actually been involved in intimately in this film and sort of living with those last difficult years in the film process. Do you think that's eased it, or has it kept the pain alive? Or how do you make sense of your participating in this film process in the years since Chaz's passing?
Well, I'm grateful for this process. I actually feel like having this team, I feel like we grieve together. And I think many times when you lose someone, you tend to get more and more alone in the grief. And, for the past 3 years, we have all stuck together and, and worked on this project and just rejoiced about our memories of Chaz throughout the whole time. And that's a huge help, I think, in grieving, for me at least.
Well, it's a good segue for me to ask Kate. Kate, you've been kind of the lead co-director on this. As much as it's been a collaboration, it also has fallen a lot on your shoulders to be pushing and keeping this thing moving forward in a most unusual collaborative filmmaking process. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed and how it developed out of Chaz's own vision for what the film would be?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. It's been, we didn't really know what film we were making from the very beginning. We didn't know what the ending would be. None of us did. And so it's been a process the whole way. But it was really set, the tone was set by the fact that each one of us was involved in the actual filming. So, Chaz would put out a call for who can help film this day, and whoever could actually do it would step up. And so in some ways, that collaborative effort of gathering the footage, it was just a natural next step for the editorial side of things. And everybody has stuck with the filmmaking process the whole way through, and it's been just a real joy to do it as a group.
It's a quite extraordinary collaborative effort that I've had a chance to watch develop over the last couple of years. One of the key decisions that you make, and I'm wondering how much of this was your vision or Chaz's, is it's what I call a present tense film. You had many opportunities in the last couple of years to sit down with Nancy or with the Chaz's sons or others of your team to reflect on the experience that you went through, but you chose to keep this in the moment, almost in strict chronological order. How did that decision come about, and what were you trying to accomplish with that?
Well, I would say that, there were over 200 hours of footage filmed on all different kinds of formats. It was, just digging through the amount of footage that we had was a huge Herculean effort. And, but as we did it, we found these incredible moments that were present tense moments that, that really told us that we had an incredibly special film that you never, ever, ever see. And that in order for us to make the most of those little morsels of footage, we knew that we should never, if at all possible, go into a different tense than the present tense.
And it maybe leads directly into a question for Mike, who's there with you. Mike, it fell on your shoulders to be editing and helping find the story within these 200 hours. Tell us a little bit about how you approached that task. Was it obvious to you from the get-go that you would end on Chaz's death and have nothing more after that? That was a very bold, brave, and sort of gutting decision, I think, to not sort of have a kind of a denouement in a way after that. Talk a little bit about that decision and finding the story within the footage.
Well, I want to acknowledge also that we had a couple of other wonderful editors from the Bay Area who helped with the editing of the film, Kitty Kravasik and Kate Linhart, who were both amazing and helping find those wonderful moments that Kate talks about. Regarding finding the story, I mean, I think that this was unlike any other editing experience I've had, in the sense of the deeply collaborative nature of it. We had 6 members of our core filmmaking group, and I don't think I've ever worked on something where 6 people would look at every cut exhaustively in detail and come back with comments, and we would try to come to a consensus on almost all of the creative decisions in the film. So I feel like the spirit of collaboration and community that Chaz embodied in her life very fittingly carried through to the creative decisions we made in the film. I don't think we knew from the get-go that the film would end so starkly. But we did recognize that the present tense nature of the film that you identified, Peter, was one of the most powerful things that the film has going for it. And when we finally watched a completed cut with that as the final scene, I think we sensed that that was what the film had to say, and that to say more might detract from its power, and it might be best to leave the audience some room to apply their own lives and experiences.
Yeah, that's really one of the most unusual things about the film. I want to make a note to the audience that if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or on the Frameline streaming platform, there should be ways for you to put comments or questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can during the conversation. Turning to Carrie for a minute. Carrie, you run Sundance Institute's documentary film program, so you see a lot of topics and very fine films. So I'm wondering, it's nonetheless the case that filmmakers don't usually broach the subject of end of life very easily or readily. So I'm wondering, wearing your either executive producer hat or your sort of your documentary advisory hat, how you think this film might change the conversation or can move the needle in a way on how we talk about end of life.
Thanks, Peter. It's such a great question. And I think what's always so fascinating to me and probably to you is the way serendipity kind of comes into play and films come out at exactly the right moment when they're needed most, if you're lucky. And I think, as we entered the pandemic, I think there was initially a moment where at least I felt like, can we make this film? Or, are we going to be able to finish it? Is this the right time? And then as the pandemic progressed and we saw who it impacted and how it impacted all of us, and it suddenly felt like exactly the right time that we are all deeply in this moment. And whether it's a personal story of our own loss in our past, or just watching the loss around the world or amongst our communities, that it actually felt like this is exactly the right moment. And to have agency over something that is going to happen to all of us, that we're all going to go through it with our families, that we're all going to experience it ourselves. And so I do think that the film, and you can already kind of see it in some of the media that's happening and in various reactions and test screenings that we had, that everyone brings their own story to it. And I think it opens up the possibility of a huge range of conversations. And that was Chaz's superpower, right? Is that she understood that in capturing this and in being so vulnerable, that it could help other people. And it wasn't necessarily clear what exactly that could look like, but you can see the range of topics where different communities can use it in different ways for discussion. So I think it's incredibly powerful and really timely in a way that we never could have anticipated.
It really is. And your use of the word vulnerable is so appropriate here. So I want to ask Joan and Lydia, who have been such dear friends of Chaz and of Nancy's, but you were there in the room often with the camera, and Chaz, at least in the way she comes across in the film, seemed utterly fearless about the camera being there. And I'm wondering if you can talk to what her own ground rules were with you. How did she direct you? What did you understand you were doing in those rooms or in those moments? And did you ever, as a friend of hers, feel intrusive? Joan,
go ahead, Lydia.
Whoever wants to answer.
Well, Chaz was fearless and really invited us to be there and be present. And there were many times when we would just be together and she would ask that we engage the camera and pick it up and start filming. I think there were very few occasions when Chaz or Nancy actually requested that we turn the camera off. And I know for me personally, this got easier over time as the whole process got more normalized. But I know there were certain levels of difficulty, and for me, it was sometimes hard to pick up the camera when there was profound suffering happening, and I couldn't always do it. But I learned and I got better, and I could try and hold the emotion with the camera. So far from universally easy.
Joan, do you
I'll
want
just, yeah, there were a couple of doctor's appointments where I really had to go through some internal processing about turning the camera on the boys, on Noah and Oscar, because it was such a very personal moment for them. And I felt tentative at first, but as Lydia said, it did get easier. And I think they were so much a part of her life and her death. And so I'm glad they were willing to have us capture that moment. And it's richer for having shown that.
This is echoed by an audience question, which I'll just bring in here because I was going to ask it myself, which is, have Oscar and Noah seen the film? I mean, I'm sure it's a complicated process to lose a parent, but I'm wondering how they feel about the film or the process of its being made. If anyone wants to address that.
I could say that, yes, we did involve Noah and Oscar, starting maybe a year or two out after we started, and had them look at the film and get their feedback. It was hard the first time wanting to show them. I was very worried about how they would react. I was very worried for them, but they actually have been fabulously supportive. And Oscar actually, I remember, shaped some of the decisions around the end scene about, he probably should spend more time there at the end. And it was really helpful to us to get his feedback.
I'm so much of the film is about Nancy, your and Chaz's spiritual journey. You're both wrestling with what it means to accept what is happening, to battle against it. And I love that aspect of the film because it does show that there are really no easy answers. You clearly turn helpfully and thoughtfully to some of the wisdom traditions that you are familiar with and you and Chaz practiced in Buddhism. Chaz came from a Jewish upbringing, and I don't know the degree to which that was important or not in her journey. But I'm wondering, looking back, and maybe this is mostly a question for you, Nancy, out 3 years out, do you have any better perspective on how you would navigate your own journey for having gone through this with Chaz?
That's a great question. I actually asked myself that question about a half a year after, 6 months after she died. It's like I was advocating that she do certain things like walk, be in nature, to be in beauty, to just have the soul be lifted with beauty. And so I felt like, okay, I need to do that for myself. So I actually left San Francisco. I moved away. It'd been my home for 30 years. And I moved on the Sonoma coast. I wanted to be able to look at the ocean. That was just a really strong calling for me. And that, I feel like that is a big part of how I think about my health now, is being in nature. And, I still am continuing many of the practices that we found helpful during her journey with cancer, such as the Qigong. I still do the Qigong. I still meditate. They're very helpful for calming the heart, calming the anxiety, especially during this past year. And I think that's good for helping us thrive. For me, I don't speak for myself. It's just helped me feel stronger.
How about for any others of you? Has the process of going through this with Chaz or the process of making the film emboldened you or made you think differently about how you want to talk about end of life, either for yourself or with your parents, for example?
I definitely I definitely am interested in using the film and sharing it with loved ones to talk about those issues. And I don't think that I would have been as prepared to do it had I not had the opportunity to work so extensively with this material over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's brave, and it in a way, watching Nancy and Chaz in the film grapple with the ambiguity and the uncertainty is, in a way, it's reassuring in a way that there's no obvious answers. I was wondering whether there was a temptation to make Western medicine the obvious sort of the antagonist or the enemy here, because they couldn't save Chaz's life, and you have all these other practices that are, in a way, non-medical. But there's a delicate sort of choreography here. So I'm wondering, maybe, Kate, you can speak to the role that you see in the film of the heroic but ultimately insufficient efforts in Western medicine, and particularly the folks at UCSF, who clearly are really talented, but ultimately they haven't cured cancer yet, and that's where we are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, you know, UCSF gave us so much to give us the opportunity to film all the appointments and just be a part of their everyday life for that amount of time was just amazing. And the doctors at the cancer center there, just really, really warm, just fabulous people. I actually was really surprised at how much accessibility we had to them, and how, you know, they were calling Chaz and Nancy in the middle of the night. Clearly they're working 24/7. I mean, they really bent over backwards for us, but I got the sense that they do that for all of their patients. So, and then just in terms of the Western medicine versus the alternative healing methods, we felt that it was really important not to vilify Western medicine, mostly because our hope is that the film will, that the theme of the film that we hope people will take away is that we're asking people to normalize the conversation about what it is to go through an end-of-life process, and to, you know, to get caught up by, you know, saying this thing worked or this thing didn't work. That's really nullifying, you know, it's just missing the point. The point is, can you go through this with a sense of here and now and presence and being in community? And that's what we hope people will take away from it for their own lives and the lives of their loved ones.
Well, and it's so much in keeping with Chaz's own body of work as being proactively activist and educational. So I know you're just at the beginning of a pretty sophisticated and deep outreach campaign, and this is prompted by an audience question here too, which is what would you like to activate in the way of audience response or education? Talk a little bit, either Kate or Carrie, I'm not sure who is the best to speak to the outreach campaign, and how you want to use the film in the way that Chaz would, which, as she said, is not just about art, it's about making change.
Well, I think of this outreach campaign as vintage Deborah Chasnoff. This is just, you know, this is what she brought to the documentary filmmaking field. She really made media to spark conversation, and that's our goal with this film. And we've had support from the Correct Foundation and the Fleischacker Foundation to, you know, make sure that the film gets made, and also make sure that these conversations happen in community. So we're working with a number of different outreach and public engagement organizations, and we'll be taking this conversation to community.
That's fantastic. And I know in my own family life, we're dealing with a palliative care situation, and I didn't really even know what that was. I thought it was the same as hospice, and then hospice equals something else. And it's a rich and growing and very deep field that can really help answer a lot of these, or at least help, as you say, normalize some of these very unanswerable questions. One of the last things I want to talk about together is the title and the whole theme of Prognosis. Chaz, we see in the film, makes a decision. You and Chaz and Nancy together make a decision not to be informed of what the so-called prognosis is. And now, with the benefit of hindsight of the 2 or 2.5 years that Chaz lived with a diagnosis, and the 3 or 4 years out, I'm wondering how each of you, maybe I'll start with Nancy, thinks about that decision, whether it was helpful, whether you would do anything differently for yourself versus Chaz, because it's one of the things we all want to know is what's going to become of me. And as the film shows, it's not a question we usually can get the answer to.
Right. I think for myself, I probably would say not knowing, just because I don't think we can know things and just sort of keep showing up as things unfold. That's probably how I would do it. And, I think, as you could see in the film, we struggled back and forth a little bit about trying to do that. It makes me think about, but I'm so glad that we were sort of on the same page. I do wonder for people who, the person who has the cancer or the serious illness, if they don't want to know and their partner does, I think that gets tricky. So it's great. I'm hoping the film will maybe spark a conversation between couples about, what would you do, and how can we do it in a way that feels okay for both people.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Well, I would just say that one of the things that I really like about the film is that they, at the very beginning, they say, we're not going to know our prognosis. And then slowly but surely you see that actually things change, and maybe Chaz gets to the place where she needs to know the prognosis, and then she can't even quite ask the prognosis. So you really see, like, this is a human experience, and you might start at point A and you might end up at point Z, and it's okay for it to change over time. And each person has to just ride that ride as they can. And our hope is that, normalizing the conversation and reminding people that, you will do what's right for you in your moment. And people shouldn't judge one another for what they can do when they're going through it.
Well said. Tell us a little bit about what you hope the journey of the film is from here. We just watched literally together your world premiere. I don't know if you are thinking about other festivals, or, I mean, this is a most unusual film. It's a tough view for a viewer, and yet so rewarding. And maybe Carrie, you can speak to what you think the kind of the waters are that this film can swim and succeed in.
Sure. I mean, first I'll say that just like the lesson of the film is you never know, and you can only control so much. So we welcome whatever happens next. But I think, again, and just talking to people who've seen it and people who didn't know Chaz, who have nothing to do with the story, but who are deeply, deeply touched, I kind of feel and hope like it's going to have a really strong festival life, a really strong life of community screenings, not to mention the fact that the film definitely gets into this, but, Chaz had a long filmmaking history and a long list of festivals and communities that she touched around the world. And so I think that there will be a lot of interest and support there. We want, by the way, if anybody's watching, we would like a national television broadcast. We could think of a few places where I think this would be really meaningful. And it's not just the end of life story that's unique. In doing our research, we also realized that lesbian women don't get the representation on screen that other communities of the LGBTQ plus community often do. And so that there's a real need for this story, and it's a beautiful love story here too. So I think there's a lot of different avenues. There's chronic illness avenues, there's end of life avenues, there's the Buddhist practice. So I think there's so much opportunity. So we see this as a long journey the next couple of years, but I think it will find a home. I feel pretty confident about that. What do you think, Peter?
Well, as you can tell, Frameline is squarely championing the queer women's visibility piece of Chaz's work and this film. But obviously, this is it touches a topic that is both societally, at least in the United States, still rather taboo. And that to me is a very strong asset in its favor, is that you don't see films that so unblinkingly, but also with humor and compassion, take on something that all of us are going to deal with, maybe not specifically in the way that Chaz and Nancy have had to with a terminal illness, but we all have to go through this at some point. And I think it's brave filmmaking, and we are so honored that you partnered with us at Frameline to bring this film to a public. There is a question, if we want to share this film, where should we send people? And maybe that can be our concluding little tip. We obviously have a repeat screening at Frameline, which some of you in the time-shifting way of the internet may be watching as we speak. But after this, I know there's producing entities at Citizen Film and Groundspark, and do you want to say how people can find you?
Joan, maybe you should answer that first.
Well, of course, there's groundspark.org, and there's plenty of information there about how to reach us. We're very interested in developing partnerships, as folks were talking about. And then you want to talk about Citizen Film, Kate?
Sure. So this is a collaborative effort between two documentary nonprofits, Groundspark, Chaz's organization that she headed for many years, and then Citizen Film is a documentary nonprofit that I co-founded with two other partners. And it's really a collaborative effort, so you'll find web pages at both URLs where you can learn more.
Here's to a long road for this film and a most unusual collaborative process to bring it to life that started with Chaz's own vision. You've really done honor and have done her proud, I think, in this work. To all of you makers and all the people behind the scenes who I know contributed to the film as well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's been an honor to premiere the film with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter.